Good morning, I'm Adam Sexton. The fight to restore trust in elections has become something of an endless task. While vigilance and attention to election security remain at elevated levels in the Granite State, no matter how high that bar gets set, the truth remains under siege. The Democracy Defense Project works to uphold the truth about New Hampshire elections, and it's reconfiguring its leadership now. Here with us this morning are two former congressmen and political foes turned allies in this effort, former Congressman Dick Swett and former Congressman Charlie Bass. Gentlemen, thanks for being here.
Good to be here.
Thank you for having us.
So this dynamic duo 2.0 is a reconfiguration since Senator Sununu decided to jump back in the fray. And in the, this pairing is a little bit more interesting too, because you guys share some battle scars that you inflicted on each other back from the 1990s. But starting with you, Congressman Bass, tell us why you wanted to get involved in this effort.
Well, I was really struck years ago when I heard Ross Perot, as a candidate for president, say that democracies are the exception, not the rule, the survival of them. And within that context, the conduct of elections is and leadership change and orderly transfer of power is absolutely critical to the survival of the system of government. We're recognizing this year the 250th anniversary of this country. In my political career, never has the integrity of elections been tested more than it's being tested these days. And when I was asked by the Democracy Defense Project to replace Senator Sununu, I thought it was a wonderful opportunity to work on something that I'm not only personally interested in, but worked on not only in the Congress, but also in the state Senate and the state legislature.
And Congressman Swett, you've been at this for a couple of years now. Tell us what progress has been made, and what do you want to do heading into this midterm election?
Well, the progress that's been made is, I think, we've got a co-chair that has a unique relationship with me. We both served in the same district. We've both been battle scarred with the street battles of elections. And most importantly, we both believe very strongly that transparent, fair, and well-conducted elections are absolutely important for the survival of our democracy. So those things all combine to give us what we hope will be an opportunity to go around the state. We're traveling around the state, meeting with people, meeting with organizations, with service organizations, academic institutions. These meetings are being held to talk about this importance, and that the Democracy Defense Project is committed to not only talking to New Hampshire organizations, but also taking the New Hampshire example nationwide, so that people see this is how we do it successfully in New Hampshire. This is how we hope that we can help you do it likewise in your place.
Yeah, and much of this intensity gets driven by the federal elections, and we've seen, interestingly, the White House change hands between parties in the last 3 presidential elections, which one might think is an indicator of, okay, the system is healthy and it can go back and forth, but a lot of people have seen this trading back and forth, and it just seems to amplify the conspiracy theories each time in each cycle. How do we break that cycle, Congressman Bass?
Well, first of all, it's difficult for that kind of issue to be prevalent in New Hampshire, because we have so many different people, almost all of whom are volunteers, overseeing the election process. Our state constitution requires age, domicile, and citizenship in order to vote. I think we seek to meet that balance between accessibility and making sure that the people who are voting are qualified, are allowed or should be doing so. But it's a very touchy-feely process. And my sister, for example, she goes down and she watches what's going on, helps count the ballots, and as a volunteer. And in that way, you build public trust at the local level. Everybody knows that in a given town or city or ward, there's not anything going on, and we have an amazing history here in New Hampshire of having good integrity in our election process. And the mistakes that have been made are those. They're mistakes. They're not conspiracies or any other thing. And we need to project that that system or philosophy outside of our state.
And what are your thoughts,
Congressman?
Well,
you mentioned, Adam, that we've had a switch of parties in the White House in the last several elections. That is true. But what we don't have is cooperative engagement in the Congress, in the White House, even going through those 4-year terms. And what I hope to be with Charlie is an example of two people from opposing sides who are committed to making this country better by working together. That doesn't mean we agree on everything, but we can agree on the need for transparent and fair elections. And if we accomplish that, then we feel that that's going to bring more people back to the federal government, back to their communities in a way that is conducive and cooperative, and that will help build better solutions out of those discussions.
Yeah, two important and trusted voices here. You guys are up against this new phenomenon now where our foreign adversaries can turn on a fire hose of misinformation and disinformation on social media platforms and really start to try to warp the way that people think about these things. How do you do battle with that, Congressman?
It's frightening, really, frankly. AI, foreign control of information that people see, and basically it's human nature to agree with the issues that you agree with and not agree even if the information isn't correct. If you have an underlying process, we can't change policy, we can't change the internet, we can't do that. But if underlying all that is a process that is believable, understandable, transparent, I think we have a better chance of getting an outcome that people who vote say, yes, that's probably what a well-run election.
Yeah, and so much of this is around voting machines. New Hampshire doesn't have those.
We don't use voting machines. The important thing is to remember these are vote counting machines, and they're not hooked up to the internet. They're not hooked up to any computers. They are self-contained machines that can be analyzed, can be audited, can be tested before the election is run. They can be tested afterwards and audited, and that they are counting paper ballots. And those paper ballots are hard copies of the person's intention with what vote markings they put on those ballots. And so we think that's what it makes for a real transparent election. Then you've got to ensure that those ballots are securely kept when they're being stored. You have to make sure that they're counted accurately. There are many other things that go into that, but part of what makes it so effective in New Hampshire is the intimacy of the process. Everybody knows everybody. Everybody is aware of who's coming in, who's voting, and whatnot. And we have, the last election, we had 75% of our electorate out there participating. That is almost as good as what I found in Denmark when I was ambassador there, where 90% of the people turned out. But it's a different kind of turnout, and it's a different kind of system. So that 75% was very encouraging, and New Hampshire needs to keep that participation
Dick's entirely right. As a measure of the integrity of the system, turnout is one of the key factors, and in New Hampshire we have turnout that is amongst the highest in the nation.
Yeah, and I was going to say the antidote here is the come see for yourself, right? People can go and watch the process unfold. It's a lot harder to allege a conspiracy when you see it's a lot of senior citizens just trying to do their civic duty. But do you think that's effective enough? And we'll start with you, Congressman Bass, for someone to just come and see what's going on in their town.
Sure. It's easy to vote in New Hampshire. The identification issue notwithstanding, we have same-day voter registration. We know by law that if the election is close enough, there's an automatic right for a recount. That's all done manually. And I think that citizens can see, if they choose to come to vote, how well it's run. And Dick makes a very good point. These are vote counting machines, not voting machines. It's not electronic. It's not all going through the internet. It can't be hacked. There's none of that. And we get almost all of our results usually in by before midnight.
That's right.
And Secretary of State Gardner famously said you can't hack that pencil. Important distinction here, Congressman Sweat. Voter fraud exists, and it gets prosecuted here in New Hampshire. What you guys are trying to stand up for is the idea that that it exists, but it's not a widespread, coordinated conspiracy of people trying to do it.
We don't have any instances where that fraud has altered an election result. We have caught people voting, in two different places or doing something else that constitutes fraud. But as you say, it is important that people understand that those are minor and minimal number of occurrences, and the influence on the election is nil. And that's what we want to make sure that we maintain, because that's where people's confidence in government, their trust in government is seated. If we can nourish that with transparent, fair elections, then maybe they'll think higher or better of the people that get elected. Even if they don't get their candidate elected, the system proved that that was the will of the people, and therefore the government should be allowed to take those steps in that direction.
And getting back to where we started here, Dick's and my interest in going on venues like this is to make sure that New Hampshire people understand that the integrity of the election process is critical, regardless of whether you're liberal, conservative, moderate, Republican, Democrat, white or black, from this part of this country to the survival of this country.
Well, gentlemen, thanks so much for your perspectives, and glad you've patched things up from 30 years ago.
Well,
Much appreciated.
Maybe.
We'll see.
All right, thanks again.